This is Freeze, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube, and I would have been better than forgiven if I wouldn't get injured.
This is Thorin versus Reddit, episode 15. If you see the overlay, you know I'm back in my League of Legends bag. Haven't done it for League of Legends for a while, because there was a few years where sometimes I didn't want to pick more relevant stuff because I wasn't watching every single game of every team, so you don't really want to speak as an authority on that or claim to have more insight. So this is one where, for people who don't know, I kind of leveled up how I do these. I show the actual comment on screen now, so you don't have to just hear me speaking it. You can also read it yourself if you want and just listen to my thoughts on it. Generally, you know, it's a mixed bag, but I tend to pick historical context ones because that's obviously my lane. I've been around for a long time in League of Legends, and I researched the years before I was in League of Legends. So, starting out here, we're going to look at the first one. I'm going to do these more regularly. This was a comment where it says, so it's 43 points. Froggen was on Alliance though, right? That was a legit super team. Now, this is a comment in a thread where and something that'll be addressed later in this video actually, there is a common sentiment on Reddit where there's the people who followed Froggen's career a long time and have always thought he was a good player through ups and downs, maybe a very good player at certain times, maybe just a good player and a decent LCS mid laner at the worst times. But what happens is, as with all great players, people who are lovers or haters tend to be very hyperbolic. So the person who is his fan, he was the greatest even when he was on a bad team, and therefore they always go, oh, he doesn't have any help, etc. The problem is, the hater then takes that, and then when he is on a bad team goes, oh, it's weird how he never has any help, isn't it? And they kind of basically say the same point, but with a different kind of bias behind it. So when people tend to bring up the Echo Fox period, Elements was obviously pretty bad towards the end, and then now, more recently in Golden Guardians time, where it's gotten better, but it's still nowhere close to an elite team that you'd expect to play with Froggen's legacy to be playing on. Someone might say this comment. It's actually a very common sentiment I've seen mentioned many, many times, and it's not entirely unfounded. So this guy's saying, well, he was on Alliance, right? And that was a legit super team. Now, here's the problem with that. I've referenced it many times in the past, but that was years ago now. So there's a newer crop of fans who probably don't know this. Part of the problem here, which is why I don't blame someone for hearing Alliance was a super team and repeating it, is that the problem is this. In Season 2, famously, that's when Froggen became a top pro. He was playing for CLG Europe, CLG.EU, where they went to the OGN finals, they went to World semi-finals, they beat Moscow 5, had a great rivalry with them. Then you come to Season 3, all that happened was CLG.EU left being CLG because obviously there was a Europe and North America, and the LCS had started, you couldn't have sister teams, and they became Evil Geniuses. So when they became Evil Geniuses, same exact lineup, they deteriorated as a team, and at least a bit of that meta changed, and on top of that, more teams rose up in Europe. Famously, in the summer of that year, there was an incredibly good amount of teams. That was when you had, for example, the Lemon Dogs team come along. More importantly, though, when they were going into the off-season from Season 3, it became known, right, Froggen's going to leave initially on his own, and he's going to make a team, and who knows where they're going to end up playing, right? Then once that was known, Snoopy, Yellow Pete, who's decided they were going to go to North America. They ended up actually eventually competing under the Evil Geniuses brand there, because what was the other brand that Evil Geniuses had? Well, in Dota, StarCraft, they put many of their European players on the brand Alliance, so that was the sister brand of Evil Geniuses, and they had a very clever workaround as to how they got to have Evil Geniuses in the NALCS and Alliance in the EU LCS. It wasn't the LEC back then, and basically it's because it wasn't actually like a true sister team. They just claimed to be sponsoring the North American team, and instead the European team, the Alliance one, was their real one. So anyway, when they fractured the talent like that, and initially, you know, someone like Krepo was trying out for Froggen's team that he was going to have in the off-season, when it ended up being initially only Froggen, this is the key detail, the hype in Europe was because actually Froggen's reputation, despite the fact with fans it dropped in the summer because people had all those narratives they started, he doesn't roam, he doesn't play assassins, grains of truth to them, but definitely overplayed, as you can see in my article, Froggen Control, if you ever want to see a great article about Froggen's career during the best times. And even though the public might have thought he dropped a little bit down, a lot of people still had him like third or fourth best European mid. This is the period in time where, behind the scenes, there were plenty of players still thought he was the best mid or one of the best mids in Europe, and a lot of players wanted to play with him or have him join their team. So Froggen decided, actually, well, I've been loyal to the old team for a year. Didn't work out for me. I stuck with people like Snoopy and Crepo. I stuck with a team that was starting to fall apart. People's champions pools have gone bad. Their individual form's gone bad. They don't look like they're going to be top players. I'll start over. And so his initial plan, this is actually something I'll probably do a video on at some point in time, because I actually think the biggest problem in Froggen's career has been nothing to do with individual skills. It's been nothing to do with playing style. It's been nothing to do with meta switches. It's been nothing to do with offers available to him at the time. It's been nothing to do with people who'd want to play with him. It's not like one of those Kobe Bryant in the mid-2000s where it's true, a lot of people didn't want to play with him, despite the fact he was the best player. No, the real problem in Froggen's career has been his own approach to how he's chosen, like which path, when he reaches a fork in the road, he chooses to go with. And so in this example here, this will lay some of the groundwork for the theory I'll probably bring out in a video or an article one day, which is basically, because Froggen's someone who just plays the game so much, even in that off-season where he wasn't at Worlds, he was playing League of Legends like a motherfucker. He was totally into the game still. This is a guy where he didn't want to judge the game on like, right, well, that person's had this many championships, or he's been like top 4 in the last season, so he's like the 3rd best. He wasn't using like the kind of narratives or the meta-contextual analysis that an analyst might use or a fan might use, because we, in theory, should only judge the official games. He's someone who wanted to know, when I play with a guy, does he seem like he's really good? Does it seem like he could help me? Does it seem like we play together? And so he made what was a project that became dubbed the Froggen Super Team. Now, it was dubbed the Super Team by fans, but that's also because at the time he was trialing so many different people. He had a bunch of unknown talents, he had a bunch of proven talents. And at one point in time, there was potentially going to be a lineup that would have been Froggen in the mid lane, Shook as the jungler. That was the one at point in time, because at the time, remember, Shook had been banned in Season 3 for a year. In this off-season, when Froggen had been playing with Shook in solo queues era, Shook was insane. He was playing customs with him. He was insane, ganking all over the place, doing crazy shit. Obviously, people eventually saw that in Alliance when Alliance really got rolling. But famously with Shook, he was also a person where in practice in a solo queue like that, he totally knew what he wanted to do, and he was incredibly, incredibly skilled. But in actual official games, he never quite turned up that way. So people don't know. Shook was part of the Super Team edition, because someone thought this is like when Incarnation was brought to Cloud9. Well, we know this guy's super skilled, but he was banned, so no one had access to his skills. So if anything, he's becoming a rookie when he's actually way more advanced than a rookie should be. So there was a lot of hype about bringing not only Shook into the LCS, but with Froggen, a guy that, by the way, had just played with a decaying jungler who was a supportive jungler, but wasn't like a super, super strong jungler. He's more of like the play the map jungler. And yeah, early in his career, great ganker, but had lost a lot of that in Season 3 because of his champion pool. So now you thought, we've got the best laning mid, very strong team fighting mid, we've got a great ganking jungler and a proactive jungler. Right, let's get the rest of the map filled out. So the rest of the Super Team, and remember, a key note, I always bring this up because people always misunderstand. Super Team is actually supposed to mean when the team's constructed on paper at that moment, it's a Super Team. Like either all the players, or let's say 4 out of the 5, are very, very good or among the best in their role, and therefore the idea is putting them all together makes a super team. Think of this analogy, okay? Is the Justice League a super team of superheroes? Of course it is, right? You've got Batman, you've got fucking Superman, you've got the Green Lantern, you've got the Flash, you've got the Martian Manhunter. These are the best heroes in the DC universe. Now, if the Justice League goes and battles a big enemy, and okay, obviously in the end they always win somehow, pretty much. There's a couple of famous stories where they don't. But let's say at one point in the story they lose, and they're all desolate, and some of them in chains, and one of them seems to be dead, and they've been completely wrecked by some great strategy by the guy who baited them into something, some Ra's al Ghul type motherfucker just outwitted them all. Tower of Babel, go look it up. In this scenario, does the fact they lost to Ra's al Ghul not make them a super team anymore? Of course not. They're still a super team. They're just a super team that lost. They failed to live up to those expectations. And in fact, the fact they lost to Ra's al Ghul isn't like, well, he was obviously better than them anyway and all their powers combined. No, it's actually shocking. They should have wrecked him overall. So how have they done it? The super team has failed expectations. It's about expectations. So anyway, Shook and Froggen, to some degree, I'm with you. Super team there. Now, one of the top laners that originally it was going to be was actually... Initially, it was going to be a guy, it was actually potentially going to be Kevin from SK Gaming. He, at the time, in SK Gaming, even though that team had decayed massively, he was actually thought to be the main carry of the team. He was a very, very strong player. Ocelot had fallen off a lot. Their bot lane was more of like a go-even type bot lane. Kevin was a very strong individual top laner. A lot of people in Europe had a lot of hype for him. I could imagine because he was quite a quiet guy, like not in terms like he didn't talk, but like he wasn't like an egotistical guy. He was in that sense, he was quite down-to-earth German guy in that sense. I could see Froggen vibing with that and thinking, I'll have a no-nonsense top who can just play a lot of stuff, can take pressure, can carry if he needs to. He's just played with Wicked, remember? And the problem with Wicked up to that point in time was Wicked in Season 3 still tried to force that, like, I'm going to carry the game from top lane. Because remember, Season 2 was about a very strong solo laners. The problem is in Season 3, Wicked's top lane pool dropped off massively. It didn't adapt that well in the summer when everyone remembers mid was playing all the assassins, right? What people forget about top lane was you had this insane variety of AP champions you could play. And there was definitely opportunities to carry. So the fact that all these other strong top laners in Europe extinct, you had obviously fucking Zoro Zero, Soaz, the fact all these guys are popping off and showing all these different champions, and then Wicked's champion pool is struggling, and he's not getting all those strong champions going. Meanwhile, his mid's still very good, but can't play as well in the assassin meta as the other assassin. And as a result, by the way, there's a knock-on effect people never mention. Because he had a weak bot lane in Evil Geniuses, and his top's struggling, and his jungle's a liability, how is he just going to play assassins then? If he gets behind 1 or 2 kills, he fucks up one roam, that's game over. What Froggen was doing instead was like, right, I'll just get to a point where it's still possible to win this game. If I can survive this assassin, I can outlane him, I can get to a team fight and all my team isn't dead, we have a chance to win. And there were games like that. So anyway, then I can't remember if it was before or after Kevin, I think possibly before, another solo queue player that had caught Froggen's eye from playing all these customs and solo queue matches was the Swedish player JWOW, J-W-A-O-W. You might not even remember him now, but at the time, he was very highly touted because he was a really young guy. He'd been playing in what was the equivalent of the Challengers thing. I don't think it was called that back then. And this was someone where people thought, right, he's a really talented player. The problem was he was under contract with TCM Gaming. I think it's actually a UK, Team Cooler Master. Is it a UK? It's either UK or Denmark, maybe Danish, right? And at the time, the buyout was considered too large, or, you know, he didn't want to leave his contract or something, or they wouldn't let him out of his contract. So at the time, he couldn't get this player. That player actually, if you know, later on went on to play in Gamers 2, didn't work out very well, never became a top player, never became like some elite guy who was playing in the LCS. He actually later on did play, funnily enough, with Elements, but time had gone by then. He never really made it as a top player. So that was the one he wanted, Kevin or JWOW, but he couldn't get those guys. They weren't available. Kevin, I can't remember if he just passed on him or Kevin had already signed up to SK because I think SK actually managed to retain him. They had a good relationship with him. JWOW, we couldn't get because of the buyout. So in the end, he gives Wicked a try in these tryouts. Yeah, Wicked's doing pretty well, actually. So you know what? He lets Wicked come back. Already, it's not a super team right there, guys. Season 3 Wicked was not a player that can be on a super team. Like Season 2 Wicked, yeah, bang on. One of the best top laners in the world, quite frankly. I can make a super team out of him tomorrow. Already, it's not going to be much of a super team unless the other 2 players we had, the bot lane's really strong, right? So who are we adding as the bot lane at this point in time? Okay, you go to the bot lane. The original bot lane, and this was a key aspect of this team, just as it was going to be Froggen, Shook, JWOW, the bot lane actually, when they were playing all the customs in the off-season, was going to be Edward, aka Gosu Pepper, from Gambit, who at this point in time hadn't gone back to Gambit yet. Remember, he'd played Season 3 Summer on Curse, he'd left Gambit, they'd made top 8 at Worlds, but they were never quite as good with Voidal, and when they'd been in the LCS with Darker. Obviously, they missed something, but understandably, Edward had wanted to go afield, try his luck elsewhere, not travel fucking 50 billion hours every day to the LCS each week. Lived in NA, was on the Curse team, it was a decent enough team. He's coming back to Europe, and before he goes to Gambit again, which ended up being kind of a blockbuster move and resurrected that team for a while, instead, he was going to join this team, and it was going to be Edward, and the whole reason Edward was going to join this team is because at the time he was friends with the Czech AD carry Freeze, who was still a very strong up-and-comer, actually. This was the year Freeze had come up in the summer, just before the summer when he'd been playing with like the Heimersdingers Colossi team, when Mithy had sort of trained him up. Then he'd gone to the LCS, and he'd played for the team that was formerly Copenhagen Wolves, now Ninjas in Pyjamas, where he got to play with obviously Deficio, and then Deficio was trying to tame some of that raw aggression that Mithy had brought out of him. Sounded like fucking that guy out of, like, what's his name, out of fucking Force Awakens. Raw aggression, a new fader. Actually, that wouldn't be a bad little casting for Mithy, that. Yeah, I'll think about that one. Right, and at this point in time, Freeze was going to be the guy with Edward. Well, that's a dream lineup, and the reason why is Edward's still a very strong playmaker. Remember, this is end of Season 3. Thresh, absolutely still a very strong meta pick. You can still play. In fact, actually at Worlds, there's a whole bunch of champions that were really strong support. Zyra was making the team fights a fucking nightmare when it got to the end of them. So when you think about someone like Edward, the problem is, except for when he'd played a little bit in NA, where, to be fair, he was playing with Cop, you want to see Edward actually play with a strong AD carry. That was the problem with a lot of the great playmaking supports, isn't it? They weren't paired with like a monster double lift type AD carry. So you want to see him with a really strong mechanical AD carry, which Freeze was. So the idea of getting this really young talent with really nice skill and hungry, and then adding this playmaking support who's played his whole career mostly with Genja, who's a very conservative sort of chess player type AD carry, who doesn't even try to win the laning phase, just tries to CS, get his items, get to the team fight, and play the team fight out correctly. Like, he's almost someone who's like just a stickler for the concept of AD carry. He's not trying to actually win the lane, smash the lane, etc. So as a result, everyone always wanted to see like a pairing of Edward with someone like that. Didn't happen though. For whatever reason, Edward goes to Gambit. Freeze was in some other situation. I forget whether he was like under contract initially, because obviously he was under NIP and then he ended up staying in NIP. I mean, it was implied that, from what I remember, it was implied that I think Mithy got the choice when he was in NIP. Did he want Freeze or did he want Tabs? Now, he just had Tabs and Lemon Dogs. Helped Tabs become a very strong AD carry from formerly being a mid laner. Freeze obviously was his old mate for Hyman Days Colossi. Mithy ended up going with Freeze. He thought he was the better choice. Actually, between the two of them, it's kind of a toss-up. Tabs ended up being a little bit more of a cerebral AD carry with a bit of secondary shot calling. Freeze ended up being probably a more mechanically strong AD carry and endured a little bit more over the years. Both of them never really end up being like true Hall of Fame players anyway. So actually, overall a wash. But the point to make here is, it didn't end up being Freeze. And quite frankly, I don't know that Freeze would really have been that much of a super team addition. Like, at this point in time, he was probably the third or fourth best AD carry in Europe. He wasn't close to like, oh, I'm definitely the best one or whatever. Listen, there was no forgiving at the time. But still, you looked at some of the other AD carries. Nah, it would be hard to say this guy was like a part of a super team. So then you look and Edward, I would say that would be a super team edition. That's not bad. So really, you've got like 2.5 to 3 super team members. And obviously, it never ended up being Edward and Freeze anyway, right? Because in the end, it was Tabs and Nif. Now, Nif was a very good support, but he was more of an underrated support. Most people would have picked some other ones in the league to be like the best support overall. So I would say elements of a super team. But bearing in mind, as I just pointed out, Frog had only got one of the 4 players he initially wanted, initially approached, and initially was putting the team together. I've always thought it was unfair to say it was a super team like that, especially because the implication was he picked exactly the players he wanted, and therefore whatever results they got were, you know, as good as he could have been, as good as he could have hoped for. You can't ever complain about that. You can't. So there's a little history lesson for you. Right. 6 points and then 136 points. So this was when, if you remember, Mickey, who was on Team Liquid, was then on the Golden Guardians. I mean, Mickey, bizarrely, obviously coming from Rebels Anarchy over in the LCK. 2 of the weirdest moves ever. First of all, signing Team Liquid. I know it was a desperation move, and he was someone who did pop off. But the way he popped off, like, you can't take it as though Koreans are in isolation like that. There's not many Koreans overall, maybe someone like a Pawn, who pop off outside of the context of their team. Like, I want to know who the jungler is before you just tell me this guy's popping off individually. I want to know what the team setup is, how they set up the lanes, how they wave managed to allow this guy to be able to push up at certain points of times, have a 1v1. It's not like it's in solo queue and he's just dominating the opponent. So I always thought that was a bit overrated. So even though he came a Team Liquid, it didn't work out. Golden Guardians, I never understood that one at all, because they replaced High with him and then just put him in as though he was sent any kind of a long-term prospect. He was a stopgap player at best, and then he was playing with, again, non-Koreans. So when this guy says, man, I feel bad for Mickey, I was actually hyped and happy when he played for Team Liquid. He did so well and looked so happy too. Just unfortunate when he was signed with GGS with poor player support. And then this guy with loads of points says, if someone acts like a fucking asshole and being a dickhead and punching holes in walls, chances are that they are a problem more than anything. He could have put his all into it and developed a good rep in NA, then eventually ended up on a team with better support if he was a good and competent player. Now, the problem with that, again, is it's one of those, like, cart before the horse scenarios. Like, if I have a player who's coming from Korea, players tend to be very meek, very soft-spoken, they're not actually very outgoing. That's been one of the problems with some of the Koreans that have gone to Europe. They just actually accept, like, almost abuse from European players, because, you know, the European players used to being able to rib his teammate or challenge him a bit or say, like, this guy's not playing well enough. A lot of the Koreans from their team environment, they might just take it, or they might just be resentful but only talk in Korean to their friends or their other teammates that are Korean or the coach that's Korean, and they won't necessarily share it, and so you get into some quite dark places, actually. And they're isolated. They come from a culture, remember, where even though they're nerds indoor all day, here, they really soak in their culture in Korea. Every fucking Korean person is mad, knows all the pop stars, all the comedians, all the singers, because what's mad about their culture is not only do they have these singers, but all these like different areas of the arts and media, but they have on their TV channels all these shows and reality shows each night that actually use those people who are famous at the time in that content, so you get to know their personality more, and as a result you follow them more as a musician. It's actually kind of their version of what we did in the West, where we did all these reality shows and these singing contests, where the idea is because you get attached to the guy in his story while he's on his way up as a singer going through the contest, then when he joins the charts, now you're already into him as a person, in a fan, in a way that you wouldn't be otherwise, because you'd have had to heard his music, get into it a bit more, get more interested in him, hear an interview, and then you'd become a super fan later and become the loyal fan, unless you just like their music alone. So there's an aspect of that, and as a result, if they're not keeping up to date with all that, they're going to feel really isolated. They're already nerds spending all their time on the computer anyway. How are they going to talk to their friends? They don't know what's going on. They haven't got as much time. Like, they're not seeing all this stuff. One of the reasons why actually cell phones and like media is so pervasive in Seoul is they do it all when they commute, when they're on the underground. People are always on their phone. They're always playing games. All the adverts pretty much on the fucking underground are like adverts for games you could download right now on your mobile phone. They're all like fucking like Diablo type dungeon raids and like shit League of Legends clones and stuff and little RPGs. They're all shit you download, or like weird card games, and you're supposed to download it right that moment and just start playing it. That's why the ad plays there. So you just can't take it for granted that you can take a Korean out of Korea, especially one without international experience at all. And he wasn't even on a good Korean team. Put him on a Western team and just go, oh, you're on a Western team, by the way, with almost no other Koreans. Just have at it. Yeah, get on with your life. Anyway, you're just like a Western player to me. So get on with your life. There you go. What the fuck is that? Like, well, the point I'm making here is, I would ask the question, why is this Korean guy fucking punching holes in walls? Why is he getting really upset? Why is he so frustrated? Is it just losing? Is it the teammates he's with? Is it the environment he's with? I would say there's poor player support to some degree there. Now, if you've done a lot of great things around him and then he's doing that sort of behaviour, oh, okay, obviously that entirely goes on him at that point in time. At the end of the day, he's ultimately responsible for his behaviour, but you're also responsible for the environment that somehow has created a player like that, has allowed a player to get into that position, hasn't seen any of the warning signs, hasn't figured out, oh, we need to take some of the pressure off this guy or give him someone to talk to. So I get what you mean. I certainly agree. He fucked it up and he totally mishandled it. But there was something very suspicious about the fact that he went so far off the rails there. That was a really concerning thing to me, especially because Team Liquid and GGS at this point in time didn't have a great coaching structure, didn't have a great recruitment structure, and were really in sort of a no man's land bad place as teams overall. So here's a comment, 41 points. It's talking about OllieJ, and it says, most mechanically gifted ADC ever. I'm a Doublelift fan, but man, OllieJ is incredible. This guy, 52 points. Like Doublelift and OllieJ could ever be even compared. Ellipsis. ... Right, two parts to this. One, most mechanically gifted AD carry ever for OllieJ. I think that's a pretty good shout. I mean, most people would have put him as the front runner many, many years ago. Like, that was basically one of the things when he burst on the scene that he was very, very famous for. Because remember, when he came onto the scene, OllieJ was the best AD carry in the world, and part of that was not only did he have a complete game, but his mechanics were very, very sick and smooth. Also, at the time, early on, for Season 3, Season 4, a main competitor at OllieJ was obviously Name. Interestingly, in Season 3, when he was Devil, was considered to have amazing mechanics, was fucking carrying that positive energy bot lane. Season 4, he became a little bit more of like a, I would say, a cerebral AD carry. He didn't seem as so much of a, like, he was still a very strong mechanical player, but he wasn't the kind that, like, just popped off entirely in the game. It's more like if the team played around him, then he carried the whole game with the team. More of like a Froggen AD carry than an Expective AD carry, if that makes more sense. So, certainly, I think you have to say OllieJ is like a very strong contender, if not the best mechanical, especially you look how many years he did it, how many years he was on elite LPL teams, how many times he was at Worlds and was super, super sick, how many metas he was amazing. Yeah, he'd be my clear front runner, and I probably wouldn't have number 2 that close, because any of the other people for number 2, Imp, Deft, Wei Zhao, Name, these sorts of people, the problem is they haven't played for as long at that elite level. So that's the problem. But this idea that, like, you can't compare OllieJ and Doublelift. Well, as overall players, ignoring the semantic element that you can compare them, he's meaning, you know, in the colloquial sense of adding emphasis that, like, you know, you shouldn't even compare them because they're that far away. As overall players with all their accomplishments, context to who they played with, every single year they played, the good, the bad, the middle. Yeah, I'd say overall, OllieJ separated himself very heavily with all factors considered from Doublelift. But he's only talking about mechanically gifted. He doesn't even say most mechanically refined, like the one that hit the highest peak of mechanics. He's talking about mechanically gifted. If you want to talk about mechanically gifted, Doublelift absolutely is in this conversation with OllieJ. Because he's a guy where when he swapped to AD carry again, and he was playing that role, here's someone literally almost piloted his brain in terms of decision making, like move here, but he was hitting all the autos otherwise. He was carrying all these team fights. He was pentakilling with fucking Loco Doko after that, who was a terrible support. In terms of raw mechanics, Doublelift is very, very, very high on that list. Like, I'm not exaggerating. If you want to take Korean... Okay, you ready for a bold statement? If you want to take all the best Korean players of all time, not AD carry only, all roles, and you want to make the top 50 Korean players by mechanics to ever play the game, and we're not talking about the final mechanics at the end of their career, refined, we're talking about the gift of mechanics. Like the innate ability, or very, very early on, how good they are. Let's say how good they are for the first year and a half, the first team that they're on. Doublelift would probably be able to crack top 20 on that list. I'm talking about the best players ever from Korea. Rookie, Faker, fucking Kakao. Who else are we going with here? Flame, obviously. If we go back in time far enough. Ambition. Got to go with him as well. There's many, many players we could go. Obviously, more modern players. Smeb. You go in the more modern day. I mean, Chovy looks like he's going to join this list, right? The point is, Doublelift legitimately, in terms of raw gift, might be there. Now, yes, he didn't play in Korea, didn't play with the same Korean teammates, didn't play in the Korean system and get coached and developed by them, didn't have Korean solo queue his entire career, played in sometimes bad teams or dysfunctional teams in North America, certainly took a lot of time off at certain times in Season 3, Season 7, wasn't always insanely dedicated in the off-season in the way that some of these guys are. You hear stories about Mata and Hart practicing all hours of the day, people like OllieJ just living in a team house. No. By the way, I mean, as in just working all day long to be the best. The point is, in terms of this aspect, it is fair to compare them actually. Now, he never made it from there, never completed that aspect, but you can't knock what he had in the beginning, because that is one area that he was close to peerless when he came along as a Western AD carry, until we got forgiven, quite frankly. So this was from a game thread when Golden Guardians had played Team Solo Mid, and someone brought up the fact, I think it was when Golden Guardians first beat them earlier in the split, someone brought up this factor of like, better upgrade your bot lane by kicking Doublelift, because obviously they've got Sven now, haven't they, in TSM? And then 370 points there, massively upgraded comment. This one replying to him, 518 points. Probably the worst roster move Reggie made in the entire history of the org. Reply to that, 370 points. The worst roster move in LCS history. So there's 3 points here. Let's break them down. First point, better upgrade your bot lane by kicking Doublelift. Now, the problem there is he's gone from upgrade your bottom lane, and he's only mentioned kicking Doublelift. So the problem with that is, at the time that move was done, was it an upgrade? He's implying it's not. Now, he hasn't really implied why it wouldn't been, or he didn't even mention, like, you know, at the time I said it wasn't, and everyone now sees it wasn't, and, you know, I've proven it for these reasons. He just, again, gives you kind of a hyperbolic assertion. So the idea that you weren't upgrading your bot lane by adding Doublelift, I don't think it's a reasonable one, actually. Because what you were doing is, yes, is Sven better than Doublelift? At that point in time, it's very debatable, because I always personally thought Sven has been a little bit overrated, because he, at times when Origin had some problems, he was carrying, but he was carrying in a way where it was like, I always thought you have that many good teammates around you, and you have great shot calling presence, and you have someone even shot calls from your lane, you can be kind of stayed to carry sometimes. And he has certainly shown me some macro knowledge. He hasn't really been able to fit into TSM very well, but I never really bought the idea it was just him hard carrying overall. So overall, if I had to say who's the better hard carry AD carry, I'm going to say actually Doublelift is on that level. But if we want to talk about the lane, remember Doublelift's whole problem is he's been to Worlds and he hasn't had that many monster pop-off games. He hasn't had that many games where he carried the whole thing like OllieJ would, like even Forgiven has it on occasion. That was more debatable. He hasn't had them. So as a result, the idea that you're upgrading by adding the best in the West, Sven and Mithy, as an overall bot lane, that's actually pretty fair. I think most people, most analysts would have agreed that's an upgrade because, you know what, Biofrost wasn't on Doublelift's level. Biofrost wasn't some god international support player. He didn't look he did much at Worlds. He looked like he was a bit shook. I don't think he played badly. He just looked a bit shook. Didn't do a whole lot. Was nowhere near the player he was when he was in playoffs in the LCS. So actually, bringing in this bot lane that already at the previous Worlds looked, quite frankly, pretty fucking good. They were in the group that had two of the teams that could have been in the final. The team that won, Samsung, played them very close. RNG, obviously that team ended up being one of the strongest at the overall tournament, almost went to the final, and they almost got out that group. So they've already had nice performance then. Obviously at MSI, they'd made the final. Then you go back in time when they were a duo in Origin. They were in the LCS final. They were in World's Top 4. This is a bot lane that's done it internationally. It's one of the only bot lanes with that kind of an international resume, especially active for Season 8 that you could recruit. So actually the idea that you recruit that bot lane when your team has struggled to perform internationally, you're going to keep Hauntzer and Bjergsen, who people consider no problem. That's a pretty good call. Now, I will say, one part I think we didn't see is because, first of all, that bot lane never fully arrived in NA. It was never the kind of bot lane it was in Europe. I think there was obviously some sort of mismatch in terms of how Mithy saw the game, how Bjergsen saw the game, how the coaching staff saw the game, whether he was able to implement things. He obviously had issues in his own personal game. But I also thought what actually recruiting the best in the West exposed in TSM was that Hauntzer wasn't a carry threat top laner. He's more someone where he's a hybrid. Like most of the time you want Hauntzer to be on a tank. Then when it's the right matchup or you can relieve pressure for him, you want him to be the top lane carry. But you don't want it all the time. I think people fell in love with the idea that because in Season 7 Spring, he carried while they had Wild Turtle, who by the way still had pop-off games, that somehow that meant Hauntzer was like, actually he'd been underused. He should be like a true hard carry threat at the top lane. You see it in Golden Guardians. He's still at his best often when he's on the tank. If you put him on the Jace, it's still some fucking Omega lol shit, isn't it? Like, it's still going to be dodgy from time to time. You put him on that tank, then he can get business done. But if you do that, he's going to need a strong AD carry, isn't he? He hasn't got it in Golden Guardians, and he didn't have it in the same sense in Sven, because he wasn't going to smash the lane. And he couldn't, because their bot lane never got going. So first of all, there's that angle. Then the second one, probably the worst roster move Reggie made in the entire history of the org. Right? It depends. You have to put that, I mean, after the fact, knowing the consequences. Even then, I don't know that it is, quite frankly. I would say the worst roster move in that logic, even though it didn't have that far-reaching implications, in terms of one isolated move, was kick X special and think you were going to replace him with Glebe Garbu. Like, that was never going to happen. He was a totally inexperienced player. It was a ridiculous gamble, and you had no clue he could ever have withstood the scrutiny and pressure of being on TSM, because he'd never been a top player, and you know what? He couldn't. Now, for other reasons we're not going to go into, but that was already a big gamble, even if there hadn't have been any extracurricular reasons as to why he couldn't make it as a player. So the idea that's the worst roster move ever, that's a much, much worse one. You think of some of the other worst roster moves. Who else could we take? Because I can't say the Yellow Star one, because again, at the time, that looked like an amazing roster move. What would it be? Oh, maybe you could say getting Greg for Season 8. I'd say that's a pretty terrible roster move. There were numerous big-name junglers out there that you could have gotten. There are big-name junglers you could get in Season 9. You could have gotten Meteos and Arcadian yet again. You could have got some European junglers. You could have gotten plenty of people. Maybe even could have got some Koreans like Mowgli, who's fucking revolutionised shit for Vitality and looked really good as a jungler. I think he wouldn't be a great team jungler around Bjergsen and the rest of them in TSM. Of course he fucking would. Well, at least I would speculate he would. So, again, I don't really buy that's the worst roster move. Also, at the time, both Bjergsen and Doublelift had both had this haunting past of fucking up a whole bunch of group stages, even when favoured, even in a good spot, even when it's a good draw, even when you're in the game that can potentially win you the match, doing the bizarre either misplay or lack of a play. And therefore, the feeling was, right, we've had two of these guys, they've both had the same problems, at least split them up. At least find out if one of them's the problem, move that one away and bring someone else in. And who are we going to bring in? People that have done what we want Bjergsen or Doublelift to do. People that have already done it at the top international level with a couple of teams. So let's bring these guys in, shall we? And they did. Then finally, the worst roster move in LCS history. Again, only in the context of Doublelift won the championships and TSM didn't win again. Okay, that part, sort of after the fact, makes it seem bad. It's still not the worst roster move in LCS history. There have been loads of fucking terrible roster moves. Seraph to fucking CLG is a pretty bad roster move. There have been tons of terrible ones. Kiwi Kid to any fucking team ever being re-signed. Pretty terrible one. There are loads of ones that never made any sense. Like, that's just way too hyperbolic, the worst roster move in LCS history. I know what you mean, like it's a really high level one, but it wasn't really. And obviously, that's not the reason TSM isn't the best team now. Isn't that they let Doublelift go. It's that they weren't able to recruit the right players to replace him. So they fucked up other aspects of that. And I don't think it's fair to really malign Reginald that way. What's ironic about Reginald is a lot of the roster moves that he's made that were kind of undervalued early on were the ones that had the big payoffs, like the Biofrost one, obviously bringing in Loco Doco, keeping Dyrus extra times, bringing Santorin, while Turtle's staying on board. A lot of these are kind of underrated moves that were pretty good overall, much better than you'd expected. Meanwhile, the big ones that failed were all sick moves on paper. Getting double lift, I'm not giving double lift, getting Yellow Star, getting Mithy, getting Sven. These are fucking amazing. Awesome. Getting Svenskeren. These all sound like that's the player who will solve my problems and all the past things. The fact that they then go on to repeat some of the same flaws or have failures doesn't make them bad roster moves at the time, because that's when you have to judge the deal. It'd be like saying, did you get a good deal when you bought that thing that was supposed to be $20 for $15? Well, yeah, I did. But it broke right afterwards. Well, that means that it was a faulty product. I was lied to. The deal was great. I was getting something for $20 for $15. Or in this scenario, like, you know, you need a tool and you bought one of the best tools. The fact it then failed or didn't work doesn't mean that it wasn't the best tool when you bought it. Right, let's keep going. This was one of those classic threads about Forgiven, where because he's European and he's a trash talker and he's not the most socially lubricated individual, he tends to inspire a lot of ire in people on Reddit, I've noticed. And one of the interesting things to me about Forgiven is there's already so much contrast in his career with Doublelift. Like, in many ways, he's been the European Doublelift. He hasn't played as many splits. He hasn't now had as much success because he hasn't got the championships. But you look at Forgiven's career and you look at Doublelift's career, and basically, Forgiven's career is very similar to Doublelift's career right before all the championships. Because what people forget is, even in the CLG team, which was exactly the same players, but with Link instead of Paul Belter, in the spring split of Season 5, when they were again top team during the regular split, and then they would film the playoffs as usual, people used to back then be like, see, if the Doublelift guy was so fucking good, like you guys say, where's all the championships? Why is Wild Turtle got all the championships? All this guy's got nothing. Why has Sneaky got championships? All this guy's got nothing. I thought this guy was the best AD carry, guys. /Doublelift's trophy case. Ha 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 ha. You think he's one of the best AD carries in the West, or one of the best AD carries of all time? Ha 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 ha. Idiots. What's hilarious is, I feel like the exact same crowd of people just took their picket signs saying Doublelift sucks, where's Doublelift's trophies, crossed out Doublelift with a Sharpie, and just wrote in green marker, Forgiven over the top, and just, oh, I'm going to repurpose this. Ah, excellent. And so now they're just going around saying it's Forgiven that sucks, and where's Forgiven's trophies, and he's not even anything special. All he does is a guy that you overwrite. So 15 points. The father of all AD carries is a bold thing to say when you were never anything special to begin with, even domestically, and you haven't practiced in years. 3 points. Based on Reddit, you would think this guy is some sort of legendary player. Then you look at his career and be like, WTF, what the fuck? So the idea, first of all, like, the father of AD carries is obviously tongue-in-cheek. He doesn't literally mean, like, he's the father. Like, he's not Wei Zhao's father. He's not fucking Deft and Imp's father. He means he's the father of AD carries in Europe. And he's meaning it as in, like, he considers himself to be the peak of AD carry. But he's meaning it in a tongue-in-cheek sort of cheeky banner. He's not really meaning it as a legit comment. He would acknowledge overall those players have accomplished more than him, or some of them predated him. In fact, he even calls Doublelift. In fact, he often calls Doublelift the father of AD carries, or says that he's someone that he looked up to. So you're going too far immediately there. It's an American thing where they maybe sometimes don't get banter. But then the idea that he was never anything special to begin with, even domestically, and isn't a legendary player. This guy was a monster every single year he played in the LCS. Let's look at his career very quickly. Season 4 spring, he takes a team that has no business getting wins off top teams. He's routinely winning bot lane with Unlimited, not a particularly strong support, against the best bot lanes in Europe, and almost carries his team into a top 4 spot in the LCS that split. Then he takes a split off, has his own issues going on. Season 5, he comes back. He gets a much better lineup in SK. Still not the best lineup in terms of talent in the LCS. Still a few question marks. He has a support who's very, very intelligent as a shot caller and rated, but is a little bit, has decayed quite a lot actually individually and doesn't have the greatest champ pool. Doesn't matter. He's the MVP of the split. He's carrying the bot lane all the time. Yes, he gets hard banned. Yes, there are other aspects on the map where people ban out some of his teammates. Yes, the team doesn't deliver on their promise. Don't go to the LCS finals. Then after that, he goes to Gambit. In Gambit, they just don't play around and they literally play on the other side of the map. At the time, there was a lot of clean-up AD carries, not that many people playing hard through AD carry. But you know what? Towards the end of that split, they start to learn to play through Forgiven, start to give him champions that he can carry on. He starts to carry. In practice, there's all this hype that actually if Gambit can make the playoffs, they're one of the only teams that can actually challenge the then unbeaten Fnatic who's going to go 18-0. Of course, Forgiven gets banned for toxicity, and therefore the team has to miss the playoffs, doesn't make it, and that's the end of that one. on. Then you go to Season 6 in H2K. He was a very good AD carry, one of the best in the West. You can argue about the results of the team, but he was a very, very strong MVP candidate player in those splits. Obviously, coming back after a bunch of time we hadn't even been practicing, helps them win like 5 out of 6 games, make the playoffs, beat Reckless's Fnatic. Then they go to Worlds. They managed to end up making top 4, beat the champions of the LPL, EDG, a bunch of times, managed to get to top 4, beating the wild card that, you know what, was fucking beating Rocks Tigers, G2, CLG, all these top Western and European and world teams overall. So this is some pretty impressive stuff. This is some big time shit. And even if you ignore the accomplishments, which he doesn't have that many of, individually, he hasn't played long enough to really make this statement, but when he has played and when he's had good form, he's been someone who's been stuck in a Dan Marino type scenario where it's like he's exceptionally good, doesn't always have the right team around him, doesn't always get the overall team accomplishments, but individually you can't deny how insanely good the guy is. So what I would say is this: look at the other great AD carries in the West you consider better than this guy, and pick out all the like all-star level teammates they had, and make a whole list of it and tell me the number of players. And if Reckless has like 10 players, 15 players, if Doublelift at this point in time has 7 players, if you want to keep going through all the names, Sneaky has, I don't know, 8 players. I bet Forgiven literally has less than 5. I wouldn't be surprised if he had less than 5 real all-star level players. Maybe 6 or 7 most. So actually his expectations for where he should have accomplished, he shouldn't have been as accomplished as those players. He had a harder time overall. Then he comes from Greece as well. He's not even someone who was like from Germany and it's like getting on with all the other Europeans very well. He has a very abrasive personality. And yes, that's held him back, just as it's held out simple in CSGO. And I always told him, if you can get that out of the way, you will be a greater player, just as I told Simple that. Now, he didn't do that, and I'm fine with you criticising him that way. But criticise his personality then. Criticise his attitude. Criticise his attitude to teammates. Don't criticise his ability. In terms of a special player, you go ask people like Crepo, who saw all the European AD carries. You go ask people like Mithy, who played with or against all the European AD carries. You go ask his rivals like Reckless, etc. Even if Reckless threw that shade, like I wouldn't rate him one of my top AD carries in Season 5 summer, he still said he was like one of the best players or a very strong player, and he was almost like giving him credit, like I don't agree with the way he plays AD carry, but he's a very strong player. Something like what I had my issues with Clearlove as a jungler. Extremely good League of Legends player, as in the traditional sense of a jungler, doesn't really fit the bill as much. So the point here is, people go way too far on that. He absolutely is a legendary character. Unfortunately, he's got a flawed legendary career. He's got one of those ones of what if, or I took the wrong turn here, or it didn't quite work out for him. If only he'd had a better teammate at this point in time. He also, by the way, in line with Froggen, absolutely mismanaged his career over and over again. If you knew some of the offers behind the scenes I do, or you knew some of the players he could have played with, or who he chose between, he's made so many fucking missteps, it's unbelievable. But you know what? That's because he's a headstrong guy. He has his own philosophy in mind for the game, and so he had to do things his way. And sometimes he had to learn the hard way, and sometimes he had to hit rock bottom, and sometimes he defied my expectations of what he would do with some of those teams, and was able to go way, way further, like at World Season 6. So I don't think it's that fair to malign him overall, as people tend to, because again, just as Doublelift didn't transform overnight the day CLG won Season 5 summer split. It wasn't like that's the moment he suddenly became really good and figured out the game. He'd been exceptional for years earlier. He just didn't have the right teammates, circumstances, or maybe mentality to win the game. Same with Forgiven. If he came back now and joined, I mean, I'll try and pick it, Misfits, because there we go, because I don't think Hans Sammer's that good at the moment, but they've got a very good team otherwise. If he joined Misfits and they won the next 2 LEC splits, would that mean all of a sudden he was 10 times better a player? No. He would still be the same player. His accomplishments would now start to catch up to where his skill level was, and now we could start debating if he's going to be a top 10, Western, a top 10 AD carry of all time. That's probably still going too crazy. But, like a top 5 Western, top 10 Western player of all time. We could start making that debate, but the point is he's already in contention. He just doesn't have the team accomplishments. So don't make it seem like these guys are trash, and therefore, until they win, you rewrite it that they're great. Or if they win, you rewrite it that they were never trash at any point in time in their careers. Everyone now admits Doublelift's amazing domestically. The same people used to hate on him domestically. So this was from a thread when Froggen got onto the Golden Guard, God forbid he was an Echo Fox, got on the Golden Guardians team, and it says, happy he got 13 points. Happy he got a good team this year who can at least fight for playoffs. The previous Echo Fox teams he was playing on had terrible players outside of Froggen. Most of them are now either bottom tier players in the LCS, Solo, Big, Grig, Acadian. Remember, this is before the TSM played this split. In Academy, Hard, Keith, LOD, Stunt, Brandini, or straight up gone from the scene. Looper, KFO, Kez, Mash. When this guy lists off the Echo Fox talent like that, holy shit. How's anyone going to flame Froggen when he was in Echo Fox? As I alluded to before, this is what you can flame Froggen for when he was in Echo Fox. Is why keep signing with Echo Fox if they're not going to make significant upgrades, if they're going to gamble on bad players like this? Why not take certain offers I know he's had to better NA teams in the past? You go with certain European teams who wanted him to join when they had very good rosters. Why not do those moves? Yes, you can critique him that way. You can critique him for being too naive and optimistic, thinking these players would make it. That if he just played and did his job, they'd do their job, the coaches would work with them, some of them had potential, they'd show that potential, and everyone would just go ahead and continue. One of the problems elite players who are extremely talented at the game have is they can't fully comprehend that other teammates can't do that. Forget natural skill, they can't understand that if this guy practices, he won't ever be as good as them. So as a result, a lot of them think, if I just leave this guy alone and don't criticize him, he'll practice that a lot. Or if I just challenge him, hey, I want you to be one of the best junglers this season, let's duo together, then he'll get to that level. They won't. What you have to do, that's why, for me, it is essential to get star players and first of all, give them a partner star player who they can rely on in that sense. Doublelift and Jensen, Doublelift and Bjergsen. And also, it's important to get them a coach who understands how different their mentality is and the disconnect, and therefore coaches them as stars and the other people as other players, and can basically do it separately and knows who to challenge, who to sort of give a pat on the back and encourage. You really need those people, because you see these players here, it's not that these players now have fallen off. Some of these players were basically never good. Solo, was he ever going to be a top player? Probably not. Big never really showed much in the LCS. Greg and Arcadian had periods that they were good. Keith obviously was decent at one point in time. Hard never really made it. Lord, Stunt, no. We've seen them in Challenger, they can do stuff. Brandini can do stuff in Challenger. They've never really been players who were going to be top LCS players. As he says here, it's not like they went elsewhere and became top players and Froggen just couldn't make use of them. Echo Fox got them too early. Basically, none of these guys made it. Or they were either never beens, never would be's, or washed up like Looper, etc. So, at this point in time, it's kind of wild. Anyone critiques Froggen for that period in time. Critique him because you think people don't want to play with him. There's like a way you could be a hater, but at least be vaguely justified. You wouldn't be right, but I can see it publicly from what's been said where you might at least speculate that way. It's not Froggen's fault these teams didn't win. In fact, I go the other way and I go, how the fuck did he get these teams to 7th place? How did he win some like late games against some of the best teams in the LCS and some of the top ranked teams with these teammates? I'll tell you how, because he's an extremely good individual player who knows exactly his identity as a player and plays to those win conditions flawlessly. That's why even in a bad team, he can still find the one way. It's almost like he's Doctor Strange. Like he calculates, there's a million ways they could fuck that up. The jungler could be bad here. Top lane matchup might not work out. Like we can't skirmish bot side because my bot lane's a bit dodgy and they've got a better one. It's like he figures out all the men and he goes, there's only one way we can do it. I've got to lane like a boss, not give up many kills. I have to hopefully shot call some of these guys so we survive to the mid to late. If we can get into team fights, I'm going to play the team fight very, very well in terms of target selection, damage output, play it safe at the same time, try and do as much as I can. Maybe we can win the game. And you know what? Sometimes they did, and amazingly, they were able to get some 7th places. Respect due. This was when Doublelift did an interview when he joined Team Liquid. Actually, that doesn't make sense. No. When he got CoreJJ and those guys into Team Liquid, and Jensen as well, I think. And someone was like, this year, I'm sure the Team Liquid's going to make it out of groups. And then this guy with 58 points says, just like RNG was winning Worlds last year, it's fucking esports. Mistakes abound from these 20-year-old know-it-all boys. It's as comical as college sports. They should make it out, ... But if they don't, who is going to be surprised? Right, I agree on the latter two sentiments. It's like esports, it's like, 20-year-olds, like college sports. Yes, it is. It's not like top professional sports where people have a great mentality. They're fully coached. They've got the experience in their career to know what to do when they're in the moment now. There's a lot of chances, especially for younger players or more inexperienced players, to fuck up massively. Someone like OllieJ isn't someone who necessarily has been a player who should have been in the world's top 8 ever in his career. So there's a lot of reasons when you look at these guys. Paul Belt has never been a guy who's been that good internationally. There's reasons why these guys would fuck up. The first point is one I have an issue with though. When he says just like RNG was winning Worlds last year, RNG still could have won Worlds, even though they played completely contra to the meta. They almost beat G2. If they'd have beaten G2 and they'd have made it into the semis against IG, that'd be a hell of a matchup. Because as beastly as those solo laners were for IG, I'd love to see how Uziai's bot lane would do against Jackie Love and Baolan. Baolan was inting the fuck out of that tournament. Jackie Love often plays on his own, without map pressure, without people actually having jungle help for him, because they help servicing the solo laners. So I could see a world in which that's an amazing game, especially because RNG was obviously the direct counter to IG all year, and entirely because they could survive IG's laning phase and skirmishing and get to that mid game and then the late game and execute out and beat them. And they could play the map much, much better. And they could also play it way more styles and through all the lanes. They didn't do it here and they didn't have Zitai here, sure, but they definitely could still have won Worlds. Like, it wasn't unreasonable. And then we had the hard meta switch for Worlds. Well, all year long, the meta that had been, that RNG would have won Worlds. Let's be real. Like, they were the strongest team. If it wasn't for them, maybe KT. And if you go to the very earliest part of the year, it could have been Kingzone if you'd have got them before MSI. So other than that, actually IG wasn't even a top 4 team for that year to have won Worlds. They weren't a massive favourite in that particular sense. So I think people go too far there. What I would say is this. We're talking about #1 seeds, basically, not winning Worlds, not performing up to expectations. Let's just stop and think about this for a second. Forget NA, forget the West. From Season 2 to Season 8, the Worlds I count as Worlds that are meaningful ones, the #1 seed from a region was only the winner of Worlds 2 of the 7 times. So that was SK Telecom in Season 5. And who else was it? Taipei Assassins in Season 2. Yeah, there we go. They're the only times the #1 seed ever won. Season 3, SK Telecom wasn't the #1 seed. Season 4, Samsung White obviously wasn't the #1 seed because Samsung Blue was. Season 6, Rock Tigers was the #1 seed. Season 7, I'm going to assume Kingzone was obviously the #1 seed. Season 8, RNG was the #1 seed. So actually, forget the West. You don't have to criticise just Team Liquid. Yeah, they fail on a much lower scale and level. But actually, even the greatest Asian teams, who are the #1 and are the #1 teams from their regions, don't win Worlds. It's a very weird tournament in that sense, because international play is so different to domestic play, and you can't just translate or transpose what they've done domestically and either make it work as effectively or make it work at all sometimes internationally. That's just the way the game is, I'm afraid. This was when Caps had left Fnatic, and so people were thinking about the Fnatic players and what they were going to do afterwards. This guy has 78 points. It says, I can only imagine how Reckless feels right now. He got so close, and now he has another soft reset. The star mid laner leaving. Dude has been through the ringer with Fnatic roster-wise. He's the only one who stuck through the dark times. I was full sure Caps was going to be the next Mr. Fnatic, just like Reckless and Peke before him. I do not understand why you would trade Fnatic for G2, unless it was personal reasons like management/player clashes. Maybe the coach leaving had a huge role to play in this as well. Right, it's just the first part I want to talk about. The first 2 sentences, not paragraphs, but sometimes people just do that. Right, when he's going like, I can only imagine how Reckless feels, right? I know there's something about Reckless where he's not very vocal, and then obviously he's cried a bunch of times, and so he's shown vulnerability, where people, either they think he's like a little brother, or if they're girls, like somehow that like it triggers like a maternal instinct in them or something, you know, and they feel as though they have to put a fucking bubble around this guy, bubble wrap him and keep him safe and just hug him and let's, like, leave Reckless alone under a fucking blanket. Like, I don't get it, because they don't seem to treat like Forgiven the same way. Like Forgiven and Doublelift, they're like, these guys are assholes, fucking win or get the fuck out, and if you can't win, I don't care who your teammates are, you weren't good enough, you piece of shit. Like, people don't treat those guys with the same sensitivity. With Reckless, the guy has played with more top talent at the time, more all-star elite Western talent than any other player in the history of League of Legends. Literally. That's why he's been a part of like 3 fucking dynasties, none of which he was the best player or the main carry threat for. This guy is fucking ridiculous how much help he's had. He's had, even one of his worst teams ever, right, was Elements. You remember that? He went over to Elements. That was a super team on the time he formed them. He joined the reigning most dominant European team we'd ever had in terms of an LCS split. He joined, he'd been an MVP the previous year. He was joining with a fellow league MVP in Froggen. That was a super team. It failed, but even his fucking super teams are stacked as fuck. Then you have what, the one down year he had was Season 7, yeah? when at the time he still had one of the best teams in Europe. He had a bunch of players, Caps and Brooks, who would later go on to be very good players. And he had Soaz still, monster top laner. And at that time, Reckless himself was hard carrying. Still had issues because he had Jesus as support, and it was a bit of a disconnected team that hadn't found its ground yet. Obviously, didn't have Youngbuck coaching them. But there's another of his bad teams. Holy fuck, this guy gets the easiest road ever. That's why I say Reckless is born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Fuck born with a silver spoon in his mouth. The second the silver spoon came out, you shoved the fucking golden spoon in his mouth. Then you took out the golden spoon, and he goes, bit full right now. You go, open up, Reckless. Here comes the diamond spoon plane. And then he goes, I'm a bit full right now. I've had a lot of fucking sick teammates. Can I do it for a while? He does it for season 7. I admire a lot the way he carried that season and was the MVP rightfully. Then he comes to season 8. Good news, Reckless. Here comes fucking Masters tier spoon because you've got Caps now. Probably for that year, maybe the best Western player to ever play League of Legends, who's carrying you in the fucking LCS in the old meta you didn't even play in the summer. This guy's unreal. He chose to bench himself. He's chose to put himself in these scenarios. You know what? He's also made some really great choices and had a fabulous fucking career. Why everyone's crying about this, I don't know. Like, I get you might like him, and I'm sure it was a big blow for him personally. But if he wants to be one of the greatest of all time, he has to do it himself sometimes as well. He can't always just be fucking Robin to Batman. Because in that way, at the end of the fucking game of League of Legends, if I look back and you were the sidekick a lot of the time, you already get erased from the discussion. You ain't in it with the Uzi Eyes, the double lifts. Maybe if he wins championships are forgiven one day. That just ain't it for you. So then when he says that thing about he's been through the ringer with Fnatic, he hasn't. He's been sat there and people have built repeatedly fucking championship teams around him. Is he the one getting those players? Is he fuck? People are putting those players around him. People like, as I've alluded to before, Forgiven and Froggen and even Doublelift, they're having to choose where to go. They're hoping someone joins them. They're stuck in a rut where they don't have a good enough team or a good coaching staff or a good team environment. Reckless has been in literally the most successful European League of Legends org to ever play League of Legends. He wasn't even the main carry, and they repeatedly filled all-star talent around him, while he himself is an all-star level player practically every year. What is the deal with, like, crying and get the fucking tiniest violin in the world for fucking Reckless there? Listen, I feel for the guy as well. But you know what? He's had a fucking charmed life, homie. So at 252 points, this is when Steelback announced that he's going to become a support player, which he does do in, I believe, like the National League. And it says he started part 1 of becoming Doublelift's future lane partner. Because obviously the bizarre thing is, Doublelift himself has played with 3 people who were good to very good AD carries, who all became supports, who became arguably better supports and the best supports in their regions. And then as a result, then went and played with Doublelift and helped Doublelift out of amazing bot lane. So Chowster, I mean, admittedly, when he was an AD carry, that was like sometimes a solo role bot where it wasn't like you even had to necessarily always play or attack champions. It was like a different meta back then. It was before the European bot lane. So when he switched to support for Season 2, it was much better support overall. He was probably the best support in the world at one point in time. And Mad Life obviously mechanically was, but Mad Life didn't have the shot calling, so I had to give the edge to Chowster on this one. And Doublelift got to be raised by him. Then later on, Afromu. Admittedly, he was just a talent at AD carry, but he swapped to support. He didn't make it the first split, comes back the next year, already becomes a very, very good support. Obviously becomes a great shot caller and captain, one of the all-time greats from the West in that sense. Again, great support, great player for Doublelift to play with. And then now, Core JJ, a guy who was an AD carry when he was back in NA, obviously nothing special, went to Korea, became a really good support player, one of the best bot lanes at one point in time in Samsung. That was the best part of their team, except for when Crown was popping off in like Season 6. And then obviously won the Worlds, went to Worlds Finals a few times. And then this is a guy who now is a monster support player, and the LCS looks like the best support player of all. Maybe the best support player in the West, I think would be a pretty fair comment to make, even though he's Korean. But we just count the Western region, don't we? So the reason why it's interesting that not only is Doublelift played with all these guys, but you notice there is this mad trend when you add in the Yellow Star, etc. I think even Vander, early on in his career, actually played as an AD carry in the Polish scene. What's mad is there is an insane trend of players who are AD carries, but who later show themselves to have a cerebral grasp on the game, swapping to support, knowing what a hard carry AD carry would need, so they service that guy very, very well, and have a similar mentality, and therefore can be the guy who lets him just auto-attack, and they have the go button and tell him when to go in, and control the lane that way, and know all the lane matchups. But they also know, from when they were a fed AD carry, how to pilot this guy out out of the lane, into the other lanes, pressure the map, use wave manipulation, and when to go and group and team fight. So as a result, that's why you've had these amazing, not just really good supports and lane supports, but shot calling supports and overall all-time great supports who were AD carries. It's very bizarre because we've seen it happen so many times, and it does feel as though in the future, I imagine this trend will happen a few more times before League of Legends is done. Right, that's going to be all for this one. It's going to become a regular feature. I won't promise the exact day or when it's going to come, but just keep your eye out because you'll see future episodes. I think this is a sort of running time I'll do for them, and I'll mix in again or more old school questions, more historical questions, some more up to the moment questions, just depending on what takes my fancy. This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, James Harding, NateDOhDoubleG, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, Travis Greb, Tristan Jones, Daniel Olivar, Jiangheng Lu, and special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion, one of my OGs. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question. I have a monthly AMA. Perhaps you want teasers for who the next guests are on my upcoming talk shows. Maybe you want to be part of my monthly discussion where my top patrons talk to me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the description box link for Patreon.